What if the most terrifying mystery in the Harry Potter world was never explained? Not because it couldn't be, but because it was never meant to be. Hidden deep within the Department of Mysteries lies a tattered veil that whispers to some, stays silent to others, and takes without ever giving back. No spell can reveal it, no wizard can return from it. And yet, it calls. What is it really, a doorway, a boundary, or something far more unsettling? Tonight, we step closer to that shifting curtain, following the echoes of loss, memory, and the unknown, to uncover why this single moment remains one of the darkest and most haunting questions in the wizarding world. The Whispering Curtain. It begins not with a scream, nor with a flash of magic, but with something far quieter, something that settles into the edges of awareness, like a sound you almost mistake for your own thoughts, a soft and distant murmur that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And it is in this unsettling stillness that the veil first reveals itself inside Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Hidden deep beneath the Ministry of Magic, in a place that few fully understand and even fewer dare to question, the room itself does not announce its purpose in any obvious way. And that is perhaps what makes it so deeply disturbing, because unlike the other chambers within the Department of Mysteries, which display their strange functions with a kind of cold, controlled curiosity, this one feels older, heavier, and far less interested in being observed, as though it existed long before the Ministry claimed it, long before it was given a name, long before anyone thought to study it at all, and now it simply remains, waiting in silence, untouched by explanation. At the center of this vast, circular chamber stands a stone structure that feels both deliberate and ancient, a raised dais surrounded by rows of worn stone benches that curve outward like the seating of an abandoned amphitheater, suggesting that this was once a place of gathering, of watching, perhaps even of ritual, and yet no audience remains, no voices linger in the air, only the quiet weight of something that has already happened, something that left its mark not in memory but in presence. And there, rising from the center of the platform, is the archway. It is not grand in the way magical objects often are, not adorned with jewels or glowing with power, but instead carved from rough, aged stone that bears the marks of time without offering any hint of its origin. And hanging within this arch is a tattered, gently moving curtain, a veil that does not behave as fabric should, because there is no wind within the chamber, no open window or shifting air to give it motion, and yet it stirs, endlessly and softly, as though responding to something unseen. This is the first moment where the mind begins to resist what it sees, because the veil does not simply exist, it suggests, it invites, it unsettles in a way that is difficult to explain, and for some, it does something even more troubling. It calls. When Harry Potter steps into this room, he does not immediately understand what he is looking at, and yet there is something about the veil that draws his attention in a way that feels almost personal, as though it is not merely present but aware, not watching in the way a living being might, but still somehow reaching outward, brushing against the edges of his thoughts, with that same quiet murmur that first defined its presence. And then, slowly, he begins to hear it. It is not a clear voice, not something that forms words in the way conversation does, but rather a layered whispering, many voices speaking at once, or perhaps one voice echoing through itself, impossible to separate, impossible to fully understand, yet unmistakably there, threading through the silence with a persistence that cannot be ignored. And what makes this moment so deeply unsettling is not just that Harry hears it, but that others do not, because standing beside him are friends who see the same archway, the same veil, the same movement of fabric that should not move. And yet, when he asks them, when he turns with that quiet urgency and questions whether they can hear what he hears, their answers are simple and immediate, and they are all the same: no. This is where the mystery begins to take shape, not as a question of what the veil is, but of who it speaks to and why, because the difference is not in the room, not in the object itself, but in the people who stand before it. And the dividing line is invisible yet absolute, separating those who hear from those who do not, those who feel its pull from those who remain untouched. It is easy, at first, to dismiss this as imagination, as the natural result of stress or expectation, because Harry has already faced things that most would never endure: loss, fear, the constant presence of danger, and so the idea that his mind might create something from the silence is not entirely unreasonable. And yet this explanation begins to fall apart the moment we realize that he is not alone, because Luna Lovegood hears it too, and so does Neville Longbottom, 3 individuals, standing in the same space as others who experience nothing, all drawn toward the same whispering veil, all aware of something that cannot be seen or measured. And suddenly, the question shifts, becoming less about illusion and more about perception, about what separates these 3 from the rest, about what unseen thread connects them to whatever lies beyond that curtain. The answer, though never stated directly, begins to emerge through pattern and implication, because Harry, Luna, and Neville share something that is both simple and profound, something that cannot be taught or borrowed, something that has already shaped their lives long before this moment in the chamber. They have all seen death, not in the distant, abstract way that most understand it, but directly, personally, in a way that leaves a mark not just on memory, but on the way the world is perceived, altering something fundamental within them, so that certain boundaries become thinner, certain truths become more visible, and certain mysteries begin to whisper where before there was only silence. This idea is not entirely new within the world they inhabit, because there are other signs, other subtle confirmations that seeing death changes perception, most notably in the form of thestrals, those skeletal winged creatures that remain invisible to anyone who has not witnessed death firsthand. And so the connection begins to form, suggesting that the veil, like the thestrals, exists on a threshold, a boundary that only some are able to fully perceive. But perception alone does not explain the pull, because hearing the veil is one thing, but feeling drawn toward it is something else entirely, something deeper and far more dangerous. And this is where the mystery becomes truly unsettling, because it is not just that the veil speaks, but that it seems to invite, to beckon with a quiet persistence that grows stronger the longer one listens, as though the whispers are not random at all, but purposeful, directed, reaching outward with intent. Harry feels this most strongly, standing on the edge of the dais, staring into that shifting curtain as the voices murmur just beyond understanding. And there is a moment, brief but unmistakable, where curiosity begins to give way to something else, something closer to longing, as though stepping through might offer answers, or peace, or perhaps something he has already lost. And yet, there is no confirmation of what lies beyond. No light spills through the veil, no shapes can be seen moving behind it, no clear message is ever spoken, only the endless whispering that continues without resolution, without clarity, leaving those who hear it suspended between knowing and not knowing, between belief and doubt, between fear and an almost quiet sense of recognition. It is this uncertainty that gives the veil its true power, because it does not reveal enough to be understood, nor does it conceal enough to be ignored, existing instead in that narrow space where questions grow stronger the more they are considered, where the absence of answers becomes more compelling than any explanation could ever be. And so the central mystery remains, not simply what the veil is, but why it chooses who it calls, why some stand before it in silence while others hear voices that cannot be explained, why the experience of death seems to open a door that cannot be closed, allowing certain individuals to perceive something that exists just beyond the reach of everyone else. Perhaps it is not a choice at all, not something the veil actively decides, but rather a reflection of something within those who hear it, a resonance, a shared frequency between the living and whatever lingers beyond that thin, shifting curtain, something that recognizes loss, that responds to it, that calls to it in a language that is not spoken but felt. Or perhaps it is something far simpler and far more unsettling. The idea that death is not as distant as it appears, that it is always present, always near, separated from the living, not by distance but by something far thinner, something that can be brushed against, heard, almost understood, but never fully crossed without consequence. The chamber remains silent as these questions settle into the mind. The stone bench is empty, the archway unmoving, the veil continuing its gentle, unnatural motion, and somewhere within that soft, endless whispering, there lingers the sense that this is not a mystery meant to be solved, but one meant to be experienced, to be felt in the quiet spaces between understanding, where the answers do not come, and perhaps were never meant to. And still, the veil moves. The Department of Mysteries, deep beneath the ordered structure of the wizarding world, far below the offices where laws are written and enforced with careful precision, there exists a place that does not seek to be understood in the same way, a place where certainty begins to fade and where knowledge is pursued not for clarity, but for the quiet and often unsettling expansion of what is unknown. And it is here, hidden within the depths of the ministry, that the Department of Mysteries quietly continues its work, removed from the noise of ordinary magic and surrounded instead by questions that have no clear answers. The entrance to this place is not marked by grandeur or guarded by visible warning, and yet it carries a weight that is immediately felt by those who step near it, because unlike the other departments of the ministry, which operate with clear purpose and visible structure, this one exists behind closed doors that are rarely opened, and when they are, it is not for observation or explanation, but for those who already belong within, those known only as unspeakables, individuals whose role is defined as much by silence as it is by study. Even the name itself suggests a boundary, something that cannot or should not be spoken aloud, not necessarily because it is forbidden, but because language may not be enough to contain it. And this idea alone begins to shape the way the department is perceived, not as a place of straightforward research, but as a quiet and ongoing attempt to understand forces that resist definition, forces that do not behave according to the usual rules of magic, and perhaps never have. Within Ministry of Magic, most departments deal with the practical aspects of magical life, regulating creatures, enforcing laws, maintaining secrecy, and ensuring that the balance between the magical and non-magical worlds remains intact. But the Department of Mysteries stands apart from all of this, because it is not concerned with control, but with comprehension, and even that comprehension remains incomplete, fragmented, and often uncertain. As one moves deeper into its corridors, the sense of structure begins to shift, because the layout itself resists familiarity, with rooms that seem to exist in isolation from one another, each containing a different focus of study, each holding something that behaves in ways that are difficult to predict. And it becomes clear that this is not a place designed for comfort or ease of navigation, but rather a collection of controlled environments where mysteries are observed, tested, and perhaps only partially understood. One of the first and most striking of these is the time room, a space that seems almost simple at first glance, filled with shelves of hourglasses of various sizes, each measuring the passage of time in its own quiet way, grains of sand slipping steadily from one chamber to another, marking seconds, minutes, or perhaps something far less defined. And yet within this apparent simplicity lies a deeper complexity, because time within this room does not behave as it does outside, and the consequences of interacting with it are not always predictable. Here, the flow of time can be manipulated, reversed, accelerated, or fractured, and the existence of time turners suggests that this is not merely theoretical, but something that has been harnessed, at least in part. And yet, even with this level of control, there remains a sense that time is not fully understood, that it cannot be contained without risk, and that every attempt to shape it carries consequences that extend beyond immediate perception. Not far from this is the brain room, a place that feels far more unsettling in its presentation, Because unlike the ordered rows of hourglasses, this room contains something far more organic, far more difficult to separate from the idea of life itself, with glass tanks filled with what appear to be living brains, suspended in a strange liquid, pulsing softly as though responding to unseen stimuli, their presence both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. These brains are not simply objects of study, but active participants in whatever research is being conducted, capable of reacting, influencing, perhaps even interacting with those who approach them. And it becomes clear that the line between observer and subject is not as firm as it might seem, because in this room, thought itself becomes something that can reach outward, something that can wrap around the mind, something that does not remain contained within the boundaries of the body. Then there is the Hall of Prophecy, a vast and dimly lit space filled with shelves that stretch into the distance, each holding small glass orbs that contain fragments of the future, recorded in voices that echo faintly when touched by the one they concern. And this room alone suggests that time is not only something that can be measured, but something that can be predicted, or at least glimpsed, though never fully understood. Each prophecy exists in a state of potential, not certainty, waiting for the conditions that will allow it to unfold. And the presence of so many suggests that the future is not a single path, but a shifting network of possibilities, each one recorded, each one preserved, yet none of them guaranteed. And this alone raises questions about free will, about choice, about whether knowing the future changes it or merely confirms what was always meant to be. There are other rooms as well, spaces that are less clearly defined, less easily described, including one that seems to contain a constantly shifting light, a presence that pulses and glows with an intensity that feels almost alive, often associated with the study of love, though what that truly means within the context of the department remains uncertain, because love, like time and thought and prophecy, is something that resists simple explanation, something that cannot be fully captured or controlled. Taken together, these rooms form a pattern, not of answers, but of questions, each one focused on a different aspect of existence, each one exploring something that lies at the edge of understanding. And it is within this pattern that the veil must be considered, not as an isolated anomaly, but as part of a larger collection of mysteries that define the purpose of the department itself. Because the veil is not alone in its strangeness. It is not the only object or phenomenon that defies explanation, but it stands apart in a way that is difficult to ignore, not because it is more complex, but because it is more final, more absolute, more closely tied to something that no other room fully addresses: death. While the time room explores the flow of existence, and the brain room examines thought, and the Hall of Prophecy reaches toward what has not yet happened, the veil appears to exist at the point where all of these threads converge and end, a boundary that cannot be reversed, cannot be undone, cannot be fully observed without crossing it. This alone may explain why it is placed within the Department of Mysteries, because if there is any force that remains truly beyond the reach of magic, it is death, not in the sense that it cannot be delayed or resisted, as seen through the creation of Horcruxes or the existence of ghosts, but in the sense that it cannot be fully understood by the living, because to understand it completely would require passing through it, and that is a journey from which no one returns. And yet, the veil suggests that even this boundary is not entirely silent, not entirely closed, because it whispers, it moves, it calls to those who stand near it, offering just enough to suggest that something lies beyond, but never enough to confirm what that something is. In this way, the veil becomes both part of the department and separate from it, a subject of study that may never yield results, a mystery that exists not to be solved, but to be approached, examined, and perhaps respected from a distance, because unlike the other phenomena within these walls, it does not allow for safe interaction. It does not offer controlled outcomes. It does not return what is given to it. This may be why the department remains hidden, why its work is kept from the wider wizarding world, not out of secrecy alone, but out of necessity, because the knowledge it seeks is not always safe, not always stable, and not always meant to be shared. And within these quiet corridors, where time bends, thought reaches outward, futures are whispered, and love itself is studied as a force, the veil stands as a reminder that some mysteries are not simply unsolved, but perhaps unsolvable. And so the Department of Mysteries continues its work, not in pursuit of final answers, but in the slow and careful expansion of what can be known, always aware that beyond every discovery lies another question, and beyond that, another, stretching endlessly into the unknown, where the veil waits, still moving, still whispering, still refusing to explain. The first encounter. The moment does not arrive with warning, nor with any clear sense that something important is about to happen, and that is perhaps what makes it so quietly unsettling. Because as the group moves deeper into the hidden chambers beneath Ministry of Magic, their steps echoing softly against stone floors that seem to absorb sound rather than return it, there is no sign that one room among many will feel different, no visible marker that something within it will reach beyond the ordinary limits of magic and touch something far more personal, far more difficult to explain. When they enter the chamber, it does not immediately stand apart in any obvious way, at least not to everyone, because at first glance, it appears to be just another circular room, another strange space within the Department of Mysteries. Yet there is a stillness here that feels heavier, a silence that does not simply exist, but presses gently against the edges of awareness, as though the room itself is holding something back, something just out of reach. At the center stands the stone archway, rising from the raised platform with quiet permanence, its surface worn and aged, its shape simple and unadorned, and within it hangs the veil, that thin, tattered curtain that moves without wind, shifting softly as though stirred by something unseen, something that does not belong to the physical space the others are standing in. And yet, it is not the movement alone that begins to draw attention, but something else, something that cannot be seen at all. Harry Potter feels it first, though he cannot name it, cannot place it, because it does not arrive as a thought or a realization, but as a sensation, subtle and persistent, like the faint memory of a sound that has not yet fully reached the ear. And as he steps closer to the dais, his focus narrowing on the veil, there is a quiet shift in the air around him. Not something that can be measured, but something that is felt, something that changes the way the silence behaves. And then, almost without transition, the silence begins to speak. It is not a single voice, not even a collection of voices in any organized sense, but rather a layered murmur, overlapping whispers that seem to exist just beyond clarity, never forming complete words, never settling into anything that can be fully understood, and yet unmistakably present, threading through the stillness in a way that feels both distant and impossibly close at the same time. Harry does not immediately react, because part of him questions whether what he is hearing is real at all, whether it is simply the mind trying to make sense of the quiet, trying to fill the emptiness with something familiar. And yet the longer he listens, the harder it becomes to dismiss, because the sound does not fade, it does not change, it remains steady, patient, as though it has always been there, waiting only to be noticed. He turns, almost instinctively, to the others, expecting confirmation, expecting at least some sign that they too can hear what he hears. And when he asks, his voice low but edged with uncertainty, the answers come quickly, almost too quickly, and they are not what he expects. No one else hears it. Ron Weasley looks confused, his brow furrowed as though trying to understand what Harry could possibly be referring to, while Hermione Granger listens carefully, not dismissing the idea outright, but clearly unable to detect anything beyond the normal silence of the room. And Ginny Weasley, standing just as close, hears nothing at all, her attention fixed on the visible strangeness of the veil rather than anything beyond it. The difference is immediate and undeniable, and it creates a quiet tension that lingers in the air, because the experience is not shared, not collective, but divided, separating the group in a way that cannot be explained by distance or position or any physical factor that might account for the discrepancy. And yet, Harry is not alone. Luna Lovegood steps forward with a calmness that feels almost out of place, her expression thoughtful rather than alarmed, her gaze fixed on the veil with a kind of quiet recognition, and when she speaks, her voice carries no doubt, no hesitation, because she hears it too, the whispers. They are there for her as they are for Harry, not clearer, not more defined, but present in the same way, a constant murmur that exists just beyond understanding, and her acceptance of it is immediate, as though this is not something strange or unexpected, but simply another part of the world that she has already learned to accept without question. And then there is Neville Longbottom, who does not speak right away, who stands slightly behind the others, his attention drawn to the veil in a way that suggests both curiosity and unease. And when it becomes clear that he too can hear something, even if he struggles to describe it, the pattern begins to form, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once it is recognized. 3 of them hear the whispers, 3 of them feel the pull, and the others do not. This contrast does not erupt into panic or confusion in any outward way, because the group is already surrounded by things that defy explanation, already moving through a place where normal rules do not fully apply. And yet beneath the surface, something has shifted, something that cannot be easily dismissed or ignored, because it speaks to a difference that runs deeper than simple perception. Hermione, ever grounded in logic and reason, approaches the situation with careful thought, attempting to analyze what is happening, to consider whether there is a magical effect at work, whether the whispers might be a form of enchantment that affects only certain individuals under certain conditions. And yet, even as she searches for an explanation, there is a limit to what can be concluded, because there is no visible trigger, no clear cause, nothing that can be tested or measured. Ron, on the other hand, reacts with a kind of uneasy disbelief, not dismissing Harry's experience entirely, but clearly unsettled by the idea that something could be present and yet completely beyond his own awareness. And Ginny, though perceptive and attentive, finds herself in the same position, able to observe the reactions of others, but unable to share in the experience itself. And so, the divide remains. It is quiet, almost invisible, but deeply significant, because this is not the first time that the world has revealed itself differently to different people, and within the patterns of magic that shape their lives, there are already hints that perception is not fixed, that it can be altered by experience, by understanding, by something that cannot be taught but must be lived. The connection, when it begins to emerge, does not arrive as a clear statement, but as a realization that forms slowly, almost reluctantly, because it points towards something that none of them fully wish to confront in that moment, something that exists not as a theory, but as a shared history among those who hear the veil. Harry has seen death, not from a distance, not as a concept, but directly, the loss of his parents. The memory of it carried with him, even if he could not fully recall it for many years. Luna has seen it too, in a way that shaped her understanding of the world, the loss of her mother, leaving behind not only grief, but a quiet belief that death is not an end, but a continuation of something that cannot always be seen. Neville carries his own connection, shaped by loss and by the long shadow it cast over his life. Even if the details differ, even if the experience is not identical. And Ron, Hermione, Ginny, standing just as close, sharing the same space, the same moment, have not yet crossed that same boundary in the same way, have not yet been shaped by that same direct encounter, and suddenly the difference in perception begins to feel less random, less arbitrary, and more like a reflection of something deeper. It is not simply about hearing or not hearing. It is about what has already been experienced, about what has already been lost. The veil, in this moment, becomes more than an object, more than a strange feature within an already strange place. because it responds differently depending on who stands before it, offering whispers to some while remaining silent to others, as though it exists on a threshold that only certain individuals are able to approach, a boundary that is not marked by distance but by understanding. And yet, even this understanding is incomplete, because hearing the whispers does not explain them. It does not reveal what lies beyond the veil, nor does it clarify why the voices sound the way they do, or what they might be trying to say. And so the mystery remains, layered and complex, shaped by perception but not resolved by it. Harry continues to listen, drawn toward the sound despite the uncertainty, despite the lack of answers, because there is something within the whispers that feels familiar, something that resonates in a way that is difficult to ignore. And though he cannot place it, cannot fully grasp it, there is a sense that whatever lies beyond the veil is not entirely separate from the world he knows. Luna, standing beside him, does not question the experience in the same way, her acceptance steady and calm, as though the boundary between life and whatever comes after is not as firm as it appears, while Neville's reaction remains more uncertain, caught between curiosity and discomfort, aware of the whispers but not entirely at ease with what they might mean. Behind them, the others remain grounded in silence, their perspective unchanged, their understanding limited to what can be seen. And this quiet division lingers as the moment stretches on, as the veil continues to move, as the whispers continue without resolution. And in that space, between sound and silence, between those who hear and those who do not, the first true encounter with the veil takes shape, not as a moment of revelation, but as a question, a quiet and persistent question that begins to echo beneath everything that follows. Why does it call to some and not to others? And perhaps more importantly, what does it mean to hear it at all? The death chamber. The room reveals itself slowly, not through sudden shock or overwhelming spectacle, but through a quiet and growing awareness that something about this place does not belong to the present, does not feel constructed in the same careful, controlled manner as the rest of the hidden chambers below the Ministry of Magic. And, as one steps further inside, the atmosphere begins to settle into something heavier, something older, something that seems to exist outside the ordinary flow of time. The space is circular, wide and open, yet not empty, because its emptiness carries structure, intention, and a sense of purpose that lingers in every carved surface and every worn edge. And arranged around the central floor are rows of stone benches that rise in gentle tiers, forming a shape that is unmistakable, even if its origin is unclear, because it mirrors the design of an amphitheater, a place meant not just for presence, but for observation, for gathering, for witnessing something that unfolds at the center. These benches are not polished or refined in the way modern magical architecture often is, but instead worn and slightly uneven, as though shaped by time rather than by careful design, their surfaces marked by use, by the quiet erosion of countless moments that have come and gone without record. And there is something unsettling in the realization that this space may once have been filled, not with silence, but with watchers. What they watched, however, is not immediately clear. At the center of this circular arrangement rises a low stone platform, a dais that stands apart from the surrounding floor, elevated just enough to draw attention, just enough to establish it as the focal point of the room. And upon this platform stands the archway, simple in shape yet impossible to ignore, its presence quiet but commanding in a way that does not rely on decoration or display. The arch itself is carved from stone that appears ancient beyond easy measurement, its surface rough and uneven, bearing no visible markings that might reveal its origin, no inscriptions, no symbols, nothing that might connect it to a known tradition or a specific moment in history. And yet its design suggests intention, because it stands not as a ruin, not as a fragment of something broken, but as a complete structure placed deliberately within the center of this carefully shaped space. Within the arch hangs the veil, It is not a grand curtain, not rich or ornate, but thin, tattered, almost fragile in appearance, its edges worn and uneven, as though time has slowly pulled it apart thread by thread. And yet, despite this fragile appearance, it remains intact, suspended within the stone frame, as though held there by something that does not rely on physical support. What makes it truly unsettling, however, is not its appearance, but its movement. There is no wind within the chamber, no visible current of air that might disturb the stillness, and yet the veil stirs constantly, shifting in soft, slow motions that seem almost deliberate, as though it is responding to something unseen, something that exists just beyond the boundary it represents. And this movement creates a quiet sense of life within an otherwise silent space, a suggestion that the veil is not simply an object, but a threshold. Standing before it, one begins to feel that the archway is not merely decorative, not merely symbolic, but functional in a way that is not immediately understood, because unlike doors or gateways that clearly separate one space from another, this arch offers no visible destination, no glimpse of what lies beyond, only the endless shifting of that thin curtain and the faint suggestion that something exists just out of sight. And yet, when considered within the context of the room itself, the archway begins to take on a different meaning, because it is not placed randomly, not positioned as an afterthought, but centered precisely within a space designed for focus, for attention, for gathering. And the amphitheater-like structure surrounding it begins to suggest that this was not simply a place for private study, but for something more communal, something that involved witnesses. The design raises quiet and unsettling questions. Why would such a structure exist within a place now dedicated to research and secrecy? Why would there be seating arranged around a central archway unless there was something to observe, something to be seen or experienced collectively? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of event would require such a space, such a deliberate arrangement, such a careful focus on a single silent object? The answers are not provided, and perhaps they were never meant to be, because the room does not offer explanation, only implication, only the quiet suggestion that its purpose once extended beyond what it is now, beyond its current role as one of many mysterious chambers hidden beneath the ministry. This is where the sense of age becomes more than a visual detail and begins to feel like a presence in itself, because everything within the room, from the worn benches to the rough stone of the arch, carries the weight of time in a way that feels different from the rest of the building, as though this space was not built alongside the ministry, but rather discovered, repurposed, claimed by those who came later. The Ministry of Magic is known for its structured authority, its careful organization, its attempt to regulate and control the magical world, and yet, this room does not reflect that same intention, does not carry the same sense of order or design, and instead feels like something that was already there, something that could not be removed, something that had to be built around rather than replaced. If this is true, then the implications begin to stretch further, because it suggests that the archway and the veil may predate the ministry itself, that they existed long before the current system of magical governance, long before the division of knowledge into departments and roles, long before the idea that such mysteries could be studied in a controlled environment. This possibility shifts the perspective entirely, because it reframes the veil not as a creation of wizarding knowledge, but as something far older, something that belongs to a time when magic may have been understood differently, or perhaps not understood at all, something that was encountered rather than constructed. The amphitheater design then begins to feel less like a coincidence and more like a clue, a remnant of a time when the veil was not hidden away, not locked behind layers of secrecy, but placed at the center of a space where it could be seen, where it could be approached, perhaps even where it was part of some form of ritual, some interaction that has long since been forgotten or deliberately erased. There is a quiet discomfort in considering this, because it suggests that the veil was once more than an object of study, that it may have been part of something active, something that involved people gathering, watching, participating in ways that are no longer understood, and the absence of records, of explanations, of even whispered histories, only deepens the sense that whatever this place once was, it has been left behind, reduced to silence and observation, and still, the veil moves. It continues its soft, endless motion within the arch, unaffected by time, untouched by the changes that have taken place around it, as though it exists outside of history, even while remaining at its center. And this persistence only reinforces the idea that it is not something that can be fully contained or defined, not something that can be reduced to a single purpose or explanation. The room, in its current state, has become part of the Department of Mysteries, another controlled environment where unspeakables observe and study, where questions are asked and rarely answered. But the deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that this chamber does not belong entirely to that system, that it resists being categorized in the same way as the other rooms, that it carries with it a history that extends beyond the reach of the ministry's authority. And perhaps that is why it remains so carefully isolated, so quietly preserved, because to alter it, to reshape it, to attempt to impose modern understanding upon it, might risk disturbing something that has remained unchanged for far longer than anyone can measure. The amphitheater remains empty, its stone benches silent, its purpose unresolved. The archway stands unmoving, its surface bearing the marks of an age that has no clear beginning, and the veil continues to stir within it, whispering softly to those who can hear, offering no answers, only the suggestion that what lies beyond is not something new, not something recently discovered, but something ancient, something that has always been there, waiting. And in that quiet, carefully contained chamber, hidden beneath layers of stone and secrecy, the question lingers, not just of what the veil is, but of what it once meant, of what it may have been used for, and of how long it has stood, unchanged, at the center of a space designed to watch it. The moment that changed everything. There are moments within a story where time seems to fracture, not in a visible or magical way that can be measured or reversed, but in a deeply human way, where everything that comes before feels distant, and everything that follows is shaped by a single instant, and within the hidden depths of the Department of Mysteries. As the battle unfolds in chaos and flashes of light, this is the moment where that fracture occurs. Quiet in its finality, yet overwhelming in its consequence. The room that once held only whispers and uneasy curiosity now fills with movement, with the sharp sounds of spells colliding in mid-air, with footsteps echoing against stone as figures move between the curved rows of benches, and the amphitheater that once suggested silent observation becomes something far more immediate, a place of conflict, of urgency, of choices made in fractions of seconds that cannot be undone once they are set into motion. At the center of it all stands the archway, unchanged, unmoving, the veil still shifting softly within it, as though unaware of the chaos unfolding around it. And this stillness is what makes the moment so deeply unsettling, because while everything else in the room reacts and responds, the veil does not flicker or recoil. It does not acknowledge the presence of life or danger. It simply continues, constant and quiet, as though it exists on a different level entirely. Sirius Black moves through the battle with a confidence that feels almost reckless, though it is born not from carelessness, but from familiarity, from a life shaped by conflict and resistance, from years spent fighting against forces that demanded strength and defiance. And in this moment, he is not hesitant, not cautious, but fully present, engaged in the fight with a kind of energy that carries both determination and something lighter, something almost resembling freedom. For Harry Potter, this presence is more than just support in battle. It is something deeply personal, something that connects him to a past he never truly knew but has longed for, something that feels, perhaps for the first time, like family in a way that is not defined by loss but by presence. And so, as the conflict intensifies, as spells are exchanged and voices rise in urgency, there is an underlying sense that this is not just another confrontation, but something that carries weight beyond the immediate danger. The battle shifts quickly, as battles often do, moments of control giving way to sudden changes, positions lost and regained in the span of seconds. And it is within one of these shifts that the moment arrives, not announced, not prepared for, but simply happening in the space between action and reaction. A spell is cast. It moves with speed, with precision, cutting through the air towards Sirius, and there is no dramatic pause, no slow realization, only the immediate impact, the sudden interruption of movement as the force of it strikes, and in that instant, everything begins to change. Sirius does not collapse in the way one might expect, does not fall forward or crumple to the ground, but instead is thrown backward, his body moving toward the archway in a motion that feels both sudden and strangely quiet, as though the force of the spell carries him not just physically, but across some invisible threshold that has always been waiting. The veil parts as he falls through it. It does not resist, does not react. It simply yields, the tattered curtain shifting aside just enough to allow passage, and then settling back into place with the same soft motion it has always had, as though nothing has changed, as though nothing has occurred at all. And then he is gone. There is no sound that marks his passing, no echo, no cry, no sign that he has reached another side or entered another space. Only the absence that follows, immediate and complete. And for a brief moment, the battle itself seems to hesitate, as though even the chaos pauses in the presence of something that cannot be easily understood. Harry sees it. He sees Sirius fall, sees him disappear behind the veil, and for a fraction of a second, his mind struggles to process what has happened, because what he has witnessed does not align with expectation, does not follow the patterns of injury or defeat that he has come to recognize. And so his reaction is not immediate acceptance, but confusion, disbelief, a refusal to connect what he has seen with what it must mean. Because there is no body, there is no collapse, no stillness on the stone floor, no visible end that confirms the loss in a way that can be understood. And this absence becomes the center of his reaction, because without it, the event feels incomplete, unfinished, as though it can still be undone, as though Sirius has not truly been lost but simply moved somewhere else, somewhere just beyond view. Sirius, he calls, his voice breaking through the moment, not in grief but in urgency, in expectation, as though calling might bring him back, might reverse what has just happened, might pull him from behind the veil in the same way he disappeared. There is no answer. The veil continues to move, softly, endlessly, its motion unchanged, its presence offering no sign of what lies beyond it. And this silence becomes something heavier than any sound could be, because it does not confirm, does not deny, it simply exists, leaving space for hope to linger, even as reality begins to close around it. Harry moves forward, instinctively, driven by the need to reach the archway, to look beyond it, to find something, anything that might explain where Sirius has gone. And in that moment, his understanding of the veil shifts completely, no longer a distant mystery, no longer an object of curiosity, but something immediate, something personal, something that has taken from him in a way that cannot be ignored. But he is stopped. Hands reach out, voices rise, preventing him from stepping through, holding him back from crossing the same threshold. And though the reasons are clear, though the danger is understood by those around him, to Harry it feels like resistance to something necessary, something that must be done, because without seeing, without knowing, the loss remains uncertain, suspended in that space between belief and denial. Luna Lovegood watches with a quiet expression, her understanding different, her acceptance shaped by experiences that have already taught her something about death that Harry is only now beginning to face. And though she does not speak immediately, there is a calmness in her presence that contrasts sharply with the urgency and disbelief that fills the moment. The others react in their own ways: confusion, shock, the slow and difficult realization of what has occurred. But for Harry, the moment remains unresolved, because without visible confirmation, without the finality that usually accompanies death, his mind resists the conclusion, clinging instead to the possibility that Sirius is still there, still reachable, still somewhere just beyond the veil. The room itself does not change. The benches remain empty. The archway stands unmoving. The veil continues its soft motion, and this unchanging environment only deepens the unease, because something profound has occurred, something irreversible, and yet the space offers no acknowledgement, no response, no indication that anything has been altered. It is as though the veil has simply accepted what was given to it. No struggle, no resistance, no return. And this is where the true weight of the moment settles. Not in the immediate shock, but in the realization that there will be no reversal, no recovery, no sudden reappearance that restores what has been lost, because the veil does not give back what passes through it. It does not function as a doorway in the way other magical passages do. It is not a place of transition that can be navigated, but something far more final. Harry's refusal to accept this is not born from ignorance, but from the absence of evidence, from the way the moment defies the usual signs of loss. And this refusal lingers even as the battle continues, even as the immediate danger demands attention, because part of him remains fixed on that instant, on the image of Sirius falling, on the space where he should still be, but he is not. And as the moments pass, as the reality of the situation begins to settle in, the silence of the veil becomes more than just an absence of sound. It becomes a statement, a quiet and unyielding confirmation that what has happened cannot be undone, that what has been taken will not be returned. No body, no voice, no answer, only the veil, still moving, still whispering to those who can hear it, as though the boundary it represents remains unchanged, even as everything else has shifted. And in that stillness, in that eerie and unbroken quiet, the moment that changed everything settles into place, not as a dramatic conclusion, but as a question that will not fully resolve, a loss that cannot be witnessed in the usual way, and a mystery that has now become deeply, painfully real. Why no one came back? The silence that follows the moment of loss does not behave like ordinary silence, because it is not simply the absence of sound, but something heavier, something that settles into the mind and refuses to move. And within that silence, a question begins to form, not spoken aloud at first, but growing steadily with each passing second. A question that feels both simple and impossible at the same time. And that question is this: why does no one ever come back? It is not a question born from curiosity alone, but from the way the event itself defies expectation. Because within the world of magic, very few things are truly final, and even the idea of death, which in most worlds would mark an absolute ending, is treated here with a kind of complexity that allows for exceptions, for echoes, for fragments that linger long after the moment itself has passed. And so when someone disappears through the veil, without leaving anything behind, without offering any sign of continuation or return, it feels different, more complete, more absolute than anything else that has been seen. The veil does not behave like other magical thresholds, because it offers no visible passage, no glimpse of another place, no indication that it leads somewhere that can be reached or revisited. And yet it is not empty either, because those who stand before it and listen closely can hear something, can sense something, can feel that there is more beyond it than what can be seen. And this contradiction lies at the center of its mystery, because it suggests both presence and absence at the same time. When Harry Potter stands before the veil after witnessing what has happened, his mind searches for patterns, for comparisons, for anything that might make sense of what he has just experienced. And the world he knows offers several possibilities, several examples of how death can be altered, delayed, or even partially avoided, and yet none of them align with what the veil represents. There are ghosts, for instance, figures who remain within the world of the living long after their physical bodies have gone, lingering in familiar places, bound not by flesh but by memory, by choice, by something that holds them in place between existence and absence. And these ghosts are visible, recognizable, capable of communication, capable of interaction, even if they are not fully alive in the way they once were. Ghosts are, in many ways, a refusal of finality. They represent a decision, a moment where the soul chooses not to move on, not to pass into whatever lies beyond, but to remain, to exist in a state that is neither fully present nor completely gone. And this choice creates a kind of continuity, a bridge between life and what comes after, allowing for a presence that can still be seen and heard. But the veil does not allow for this. No ghost has ever stepped back through it. No figure has emerged from behind that shifting curtain to speak or to linger. And this absence suggests that whatever lies beyond the veil is not a place where such choices can be made, not a space where one can remain connected to the world left behind. Then there are Horcruxes, a far darker and more deliberate attempt to avoid death, a method that does not preserve the soul as a whole, but fractures it, splits it into pieces that are hidden and protected, ensuring that even if the body is destroyed, some part of the self continues to exist, anchored to the world through objects that carry those fragments. Lord Voldemort represents this path more than any other. His fear of death so deep, so consuming, that he chooses not just to resist it, but to dismantle himself in order to escape it. And in doing so, he creates a form of survival that is unnatural, unstable, and ultimately incomplete. Horcruxes, like ghosts, challenge the idea of finality. They suggest that death can be delayed, that it can be worked around, that with enough knowledge and willingness to act, it can be prevented from fully taking hold. And yet, even in this extreme case, there remains a connection to the physical world, a tether that keeps those fragments from passing beyond reach. But again, the veil does not follow this pattern. There is no indication that it interacts with Horcruxes, no evidence that it allows for fragments to remain behind or to be retrieved. And this absence strengthens the idea that the veil operates on a different level entirely, one that does not allow for manipulation or escape. Even the concept of resurrection, which appears in subtle and limited ways within the wizarding world, does not align with what the veil represents, because while it is possible, under certain conditions, to bring back echoes of those who have died, to summon their presence in a form that can be seen and heard, these are not true returns, not full restorations of life, but rather reflections, shadows of what once was, temporary and incomplete. The resurrection stone, for example, allows the user to call forth those who have passed, but the figures that appear are not fully alive, not capable of returning to the world in a lasting way, and their presence serves more as a comfort than a reversal, a reminder that the boundary between life and death can be touched, but not crossed in both directions. The veil, however, offers no such interaction. It does not allow for communication in a clear or controlled manner. It does not provide a way to reach through and bring something back. It does not respond to attempts to understand it through known forms of magic. And this resistance to interaction is what makes it so distinct, so deeply unsettling, because it suggests that whatever lies beyond it is not meant to be accessed from the side of the living. And so, the question returns, stronger now, more focused. Is the veil a one-way threshold? The evidence, though incomplete, begins to point in that direction, because every known example of interaction with the veil follows the same pattern. Those who pass through it do not return. Those who stand before it may hear whispers, may feel its presence, but cannot cross it safely, and come back. And this consistency suggests that the veil is not simply a barrier, but a passage with a fixed direction. If this is true, then the veil represents something that no other magical object fully embodies, a point of transition that cannot be reversed, a boundary that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. And this idea carries with it a weight that extends beyond the immediate mystery, because it touches on the fundamental nature of existence within the world itself. Magic can heal, can transform, can protect, can even alter time to a limited extent. But if the veil stands as a true one-way threshold, then it marks the limit of what magic can do, the point where control ends and something else begins, something that cannot be shaped or influenced by spells or intention. For Harry, this realization does not come easily because his experience with loss has already been shaped by uncertainty, by memories that are incomplete, by absences that were never fully understood. And now, standing before the veil, faced with the immediate and undeniable disappearance of someone he cared for, the idea that there is no return, no possibility of reversal, becomes something that must be confronted directly. And yet, even as this realization begins to take hold, the veil itself offers no confirmation. It does not speak clearly, does not provide answers, does not reveal what lies beyond its shifting surface. And so, the question remains open, not because there is evidence that contradicts the idea of finality, but because there is no evidence at all, only the consistent absence of return. The whispers that can be heard by some do not clarify this, because they do not form words, do not deliver messages, do not confirm the existence of those who have passed through, and so they remain ambiguous, open to interpretation, perhaps echoes, perhaps something more, but never enough to resolve the uncertainty. And this is where the true nature of the veil's mystery settles, not in what can be observed, but in what cannot. In the absence of return, in the silence that follows each passage, in the way the veil continues to move, unchanged, unaffected, as though what has occurred has no impact on its function at all. If it is a doorway, then it is one that closes behind those who pass through. If it is a boundary, then it is one that cannot be crossed in both directions. And if it is something else entirely, something beyond the definitions that have been attempted, then its refusal to return what it takes may be the only clue that can be relied upon. Because in a world where so much can be undone, where so much can be altered or preserved or brought back in some form, the veil stands as something different, something that does not allow for exceptions, something that does not bend to the will of those who approach it. No one has ever come back. And in that simple, unchanging truth, the weight of its mystery becomes clear, not as a question waiting to be answered, but as a boundary that may never be crossed again. Voices of the lost, the whispers do not begin as something clear or even fully believable, because they do not arrive with structure or meaning. They do not form sentences that can be followed or messages that can be understood, but instead they exist in a space just beyond comprehension, a layered murmur that feels distant and yet impossibly close at the same time. And it is this strange balance, this feeling of something almost understood but never fully grasped, that makes them so difficult to define and so easy to question. When Harry Potter first hears them, there is no immediate certainty that what he is experiencing is real, because the human mind has a way of filling silence, of shaping emptiness into something recognizable, especially in moments of tension or emotional strain. And yet the whispers do not behave like imagination, because they remain consistent. They do not shift with his thoughts. They do not fade when ignored. And they do not grow clearer when focused on, existing instead in a steady and unchanging form that suggests they are not created by him, but encountered. This raises the first and most direct possibility, the one that seems both the most compelling and the most unsettling, that the whispers are the voices of those who have passed beyond the veil, that they are not random sounds or illusions, but actual remnants of individuals who exist on the other side. Their presence, carried through the thin boundary, that separates the living from whatever lies beyond. If this is true, then the veil becomes more than a barrier, more than a threshold. It becomes a point of connection, a place where the division between life and death is not entirely sealed, where something of those who have crossed over can still be perceived, even if only faintly, even if only by those who are somehow attuned to it. This idea finds some support in the nature of the whispers themselves, because they are not chaotic or disjointed in the way one might expect from random noise, but instead carry a certain rhythm, a layered quality that feels almost like conversation, even if the words cannot be separated or understood. And this gives the impression of presence, of many voices existing together, overlapping but not dissolving into complete disorder. And yet, there is a problem with this interpretation, because if these are truly the voices of the dead, if they are actual souls or conscious beings existing beyond the veil, then why are they not clearer? Why do they not reach through with intent? Why do they not form words that can be recognized, messages that can be understood? And most importantly, why do they not respond when called? When Harry listens, when he leans closer, when he tries to make sense of what he hears, the whispers do not change. They do not react to his attention. They do not grow louder or more focused. And this lack of response suggests that whatever they are not actively communicating, not aware of being heard, not reaching out in the way one might expect from living minds. This leads to another possibility, one that shifts the nature of the whispers from presence to residue, from active voices to something more passive, more distant, the idea that what is being heard is not the souls themselves, but echoes of them, traces left behind by those who have passed through, impressions that linger at the boundary without representing the full existence of what has moved beyond. In this interpretation, the veil becomes less of a window and more of a surface that retains fragments, like a place where sound does not fully disappear, but instead remains suspended, repeating softly, without intention or awareness. And the whispers are not messages, but remnants, the fading imprint of countless voices that have crossed the threshold over time. This would explain their indistinct nature, their inability to form clear words, their lack of response to those who listen, because they are not alive in any meaningful sense, not capable of thought or communication, but simply present as a byproduct of what has occurred, a kind of lingering resonance that can be perceived under certain conditions. And yet, even this explanation does not fully resolve the mystery, because it does not account for why only some people can hear the whispers, while others, standing in the same place, hear nothing at all. And this selective perception suggests that there is something more at work than simple proximity, something that determines who can access this experience and who cannot. This is where the possibility of projection begins to emerge, not as a dismissal of the whispers, but as an additional layer to their nature. The idea that what is heard may be shaped, at least in part, by the mind of the listener, that the veil does not simply produce sound, but interacts with perception in a way that draws out something internal as much as something external. For Harry, this possibility cannot be separated from his own experiences, from the losses that have defined his life from the very beginning, from the absence of his parents, from the constant presence of death that has followed him in ways both direct and indirect, shaping his understanding of the world long before he could fully articulate it. Grief is not a static thing, not something that remains fixed in one form, but something that evolves, that shifts, that finds new ways to express itself over time. And in moments where the boundary between memory and reality becomes less clear, it can surface in ways that feel external, as though what is felt inside is being reflected outward, given shape and presence in the world around it. Standing before the veil, hearing the whispers that others cannot hear, Harry is not just encountering an unknown phenomenon. He is also confronting the weight of everything he has lost, everything that has been taken from him without explanation or closure. And this connection between the external mystery and his internal experience cannot be easily separated. It is possible, then, that the whispers are not purely external, or purely internal, but a combination of both, something that exists at the intersection of reality and perception, where the veil provides a stimulus, a presence, a faint and undefined signal, and the mind of the listener shapes that signal into something recognizable, something that resonates with their own experiences. This would explain why those who have seen death are able to hear the whispers while others cannot, because their understanding of loss, their familiarity with the absence that death creates, allows them to perceive something that remains hidden to those who have not yet crossed that threshold in their own lives. It also explains why the whispers feel so compelling, why they draw attention, why they create a sense of connection even without clarity, because they are not just external sounds, but reflections of something deeply personal, something that already exists within the listener, brought to the surface by the presence of the veil. For Harry, this connection becomes even more intense after the loss of Sirius Black, because the veil is no longer an abstract mystery, no longer a distant object of curiosity, but something that has directly taken someone from him, someone who represented a link to his past, to his family, to a life he never fully had. In the aftermath of that loss, the whispers take on a different meaning, because they are no longer just unexplained sounds, but potential connections, possibilities that Sirius might still be there, might still exist in some form beyond the veil, might be among those voices that cannot quite be understood, but can still be heard. This possibility, whether real or imagined, becomes difficult to ignore because it offers something that grief always seeks, a sense that the loss is not complete, that the connection has not been entirely severed, that there is still something that remains, even if it cannot be fully reached. And yet, the veil does not confirm this. It does not reveal Sirius, does not allow his voice to stand apart from the others, does not provide the clarity that would transform hope into certainty, and so the whispers remain ambiguous, open to interpretation, shaped by perception as much as by whatever reality lies behind them. This ambiguity is what gives the whispers their power, because they do not force a single explanation, they do not settle into one meaning, but instead exist in a space where multiple possibilities overlap, where they can be seen as voices, as echoes, as projections, or as something that combines all of these elements in ways that cannot be fully separated. And perhaps this is the true nature of the veil's influence, not to provide answers, but to reflect the questions that already exist within those who approach it, to draw out the uncertainties, the hopes, the fears that surround the idea of death, and to give them form in a way that feels real enough to be believed, but never clear enough to be proven. The whispers continue, unchanged, steady, indifferent to the attempts to understand them. And in that quiet persistence, they remain one of the most unsettling aspects of the veil, not because they are loud or aggressive, but because they exist just beyond clarity, inviting interpretation without ever allowing it to settle. And for Harry, as for anyone who stands before that shifting curtain and listens, the question remains not just what the whispers are, but what they mean, and whether the answer lies beyond the veil or within the mind of the one who hears them, thestrals and the sight of death. There are moments within the wizarding world where the ordinary rules of perception begin to loosen, where what can be seen or heard depends not on where you stand or how closely you look, but on what you have already lived through. And this idea becomes especially clear when considering the strange and quiet creatures known as thestral, because they do not reveal themselves to everyone. They do not exist in the same visible way for all who pass by them, and their presence or absence is shaped not by physical distance, but by experience. At first glance, the idea seems almost simple, almost easy to accept as just another rule within a world already filled with unusual creatures and shifting boundaries, because thestrals are said to be visible only to those who have seen death, not merely understood it as a concept, not merely heard about it from others, but witnessed it directly, felt its presence in a way that leaves a mark deeper than knowledge, deeper than memory, something that changes how the world itself is perceived. For Harry Potter, This realization does not come immediately, because for much of his life, even though death has shaped his story from the very beginning, even though the loss of his parents defines so much of who he is, he has not fully processed it in a way that allows him to see what lies beyond ordinary perception. And it is only after witnessing death in a direct and undeniable way that the thestrals reveal themselves to him, no longer invisible, no longer hidden, but present in a form that had always been there, waiting to be seen. This moment is not dramatic in the way one might expect, because the creatures do not suddenly appear out of nowhere. They do not materialize with sound or movement, but instead they simply become visible, as though a veil has been lifted, as though something that was always part of the world has finally stepped into focus. And this quiet shift is what makes the experience so significant, because it suggests that reality itself has not changed, only Harry's ability to perceive it. This idea begins to echo in other parts of his journey, particularly in his encounter with the veil, because the pattern is too strong to ignore, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. And when Harry hears the whispers that others cannot hear, when he feels the pull of something beyond that shifting curtain, while those beside him remain unaffected, the connection begins to form, subtle at first, but growing stronger the more it is considered. Those who can hear the veil share something with those who can see thestrals. They have seen death, not as a distant idea, not as a story told or an event described, but as something real, something immediate, something that cannot be undone or explained away. And this shared experience seems to open a door within perception, allowing access to aspects of the world that remain hidden to others. Luna Lovegood understands this in a way that feels almost instinctive. Her calm acceptance of both thestrals and the whispers of the veil, suggesting that for her, the boundary between life and death is not as firm or as frightening as it is for others, because she has already faced that boundary, already felt its presence, and in doing so, has learned to see beyond it without fear. Neville Longbottom, too, shares in this altered perception, though his understanding carries a different weight, shaped by a life touched by loss in quieter but no less profound ways, and his ability to hear the whispers suggests that the connection is not limited to a single type of experience, but extends across different forms of loss, different ways in which death leaves its mark. This raises a deeper question, one that moves beyond simple observation and into the nature of perception itself. Because if seeing death allows one to perceive thestrals, and hearing the veil seems to follow a similar pattern, then what exactly is changing within those individuals? What shift occurs that alters the way reality is experienced? It is not that new things are created, not that thestrals come into existence only when they are seen, nor that the whispers begin only when they are heard, but rather that something already present becomes accessible, as though the world contains layers that are not immediately visible, layers that require a certain understanding, a certain experience, in order to be perceived. Death, in this context, becomes more than an event, more than an ending. It becomes a key, a threshold that once crossed, changes the way the world is interpreted, because to witness death is to confront something fundamental, something that cannot be fully explained or avoided, something that reshapes the way one understands existence itself. Before that moment, the world may feel stable, predictable, defined by clear boundaries between what is known and what is unknown, but after encountering death directly, those boundaries begin to shift, becoming less certain, less absolute, and in that shifting, new perceptions emerge, new possibilities reveal themselves. The thestrals stand as a physical example of this, creatures that are undeniably real, undeniably present, yet invisible to those who have not experienced death in a direct way, and their existence suggests that reality is not fixed, not fully accessible to everyone at all times, but instead shaped by the experiences that define each individual. The veil, however, takes this idea further, because while thestrals can be seen, can be approached, can be understood within the context of magical creatures, the whispers of the veil resist such clarity. remaining just beyond understanding, offering presence without explanation, sound without meaning. And this difference highlights the depth of the connection between perception and experience. To see a thestral is to recognize something that exists within the world. To hear the veil is to sense something that lies beyond it. And this distinction suggests that the impact of death on perception is not limited to revealing hidden aspects of the physical world, but extends into something deeper, something that touches on the boundary between life and whatever comes after, something that cannot be fully observed or interacted with in the same way. For Harry, this realization unfolds gradually, not as a single moment of understanding, but as a series of connections that begin to align, each experience adding to the next, each encounter with loss shaping the way he perceives the world around him. And as he moves through these moments, the idea that death changes perception becomes harder to ignore. It is not a gift in the traditional sense, not something that brings clarity or comfort, but rather an opening, an expansion of awareness that comes with its own weight, its own complexity, because to see more is not always to understand more, and to hear more is not always to find answers. In fact, it often leads to more questions. Why are these layers of reality hidden from those who have not seen death? Is it a protection, a way of preserving a certain kind of innocence, a barrier that prevents the living from becoming too aware of what lies beyond? Or is it simply a consequence, an unavoidable result of encountering something so fundamental that it alters the way everything else is perceived? The wizarding world does not offer clear answers to these questions, and perhaps that is part of the point, because the relationship between life and death is not something that can be fully explained, not something that can be reduced to rules or patterns, even when those patterns begin to emerge through observation. What can be seen, however, is the effect. Harry sees thestrals where others see nothing. He hears whispers where others hear silence. And in both cases, the difference lies not in the world itself, but in him, in what he has experienced, in what he has lost. This does not make him unique, because others share this ability, others who have faced similar moments, who have stood in the presence of death and carried that experience forward. But it does set him apart from those who have not, creating a quiet divide that is not always visible, but always present. And perhaps this is the most unsettling aspect of all. Not that death changes perception, but that it reveals how much of the world exists beyond what is normally seen. How many layers remain hidden until something shifts within the observer, until something opens that cannot be closed again. The thestrals move quietly through the air, visible only to some, carrying their riders across distances that seem almost unreal. And the veil continues to stir within its stone archway, whispering softly to those who can hear, both existing as reminders that reality is not as simple or as fixed as it appears. And for those who have seen death, who have crossed that invisible threshold of understanding, these reminders do not fade, do not disappear, but remain steady and unchanging, shaping the way the world is perceived long after the moment itself has passed. Because once you have seen what lies at the edge of life, once you have felt the presence of something beyond it, the world does not return to what it was before. It becomes something deeper, something more complex, something filled with quiet layers that were always there, waiting to be seen. Luna Lovegood's perspective. There is a quiet shift in the atmosphere whenever Luna Lovegood is present, not because she raises her voice or demands attention, but because she seems to exist slightly outside the urgency that defines so many of the others around her, as though she is not untouched by the world's difficulties, but has found a way to move through them without being entirely shaped by fear. And it is within this difference that her perspective on the veil becomes something worth examining, something that stands apart from the reactions of those who struggle to understand what it represents. When Luna looks at the veil, she does not approach it with suspicion or resistance, nor does she try to analyze it in the same structured way that others might, because for her, the idea that something exists beyond immediate explanation is not unsettling, but expected. a natural part of a world that she has always understood to be filled with things that cannot be easily seen or defined. And this acceptance allows her to stand before the archway without the tension that others carry, without the need to force meaning onto what she experiences. She hears the whispers, just as Harry Potter does, and yet her reaction is not one of confusion or urgency, but of quiet recognition, as though the sound is not something new, but something familiar, something that fits into a broader understanding she already holds about the nature of existence, about what lies beyond the visible world. This difference in reaction is not rooted in ignorance, nor in a lack of awareness of what the veil represents, but in something deeper, something shaped by her own experiences with loss. Because Luna has not only heard about death or understood it as an idea, she has lived through it, has witnessed it in a way that leaves a lasting impression. The loss of her mother, not just a distant memory, but a defining moment that reshaped how she sees the world and her place within it. For Luna, death is not an abrupt ending, not a sudden disappearance into nothingness, but a transition, a movement from one form of existence to another. And this belief is not presented as a theory or a question, but as something she holds with quiet certainty, something that does not require proof in the way others might demand it, because it is grounded not in evidence, but in trust, in a sense that the world continues beyond what can be immediately observed. This perspective changes everything about how she interacts with the veil, because where others see a barrier, a boundary that separates life from an unknown and possibly empty void, Luna sees something else, something that connects rather than divides, something that suggests continuity rather than finality. And this belief allows her to approach the whispers without fear, without the need to interpret them as threatening or deceptive. She does not try to force the voices into clear meaning, does not strain to understand each sound, or separate one from another, but instead accepts them as they are, as part of a larger reality that does not need to be fully explained in order to be real. And this acceptance gives her a kind of calm that stands in stark contrast to the reactions of those around her. Harry, standing beside her, hears the same whispers, feels the same pull, and yet his experience is entirely different, because where Luna finds familiarity, he finds uncertainty. Where she feels calm, he feels tension, and where she accepts, he questions. And this contrast reveals something essential about the nature of their perspectives. Harry's life has been shaped by loss in ways that are both profound and complicated, beginning with the death of his parents, an event that defined his existence before he could even understand it, and continuing through the many dangers and tragedies that followed, each one adding to a growing sense that death is not something distant, but something that moves close, something that can take without warning, without fairness, without offering any explanation. For him, death is tied to absence, to the sudden and often painful removal of someone from his life, leaving behind questions that cannot be answered, leaving behind spaces that cannot be filled. And this understanding creates a natural resistance, a desire to hold on, to seek answers, to find some way of reversing or at least understanding what has been lost. When Harry hears the whispers beyond the veil, this desire becomes even stronger, because the presence of those voices suggests that something remains, that those who have passed are not entirely gone, and this possibility fuels both hope and confusion, because if something remains, then perhaps it can be reached, perhaps it can be brought back, perhaps the separation is not as complete as it seems. This is where his fear begins to intertwine with his longing, because the veil does not provide clear answers, does not confirm that the voices are those of the people he has lost, does not offer a way to connect or communicate in a way that would bring certainty. And this lack of clarity creates tension, a push and pull between the hope that something remains and the fear that it cannot be accessed. Luna, however, does not experience this tension in the same way, because her belief in continued existence does not depend on direct interaction, does not require proof or confirmation through sight or sound, and so the whispers do not create a sense of urgency for her, Do not demand that she reach through the veil or seek to cross it, because she already accepts that what lies beyond is not lost, only changed. This difference becomes especially clear in the way she speaks about death, in the calm and steady tone that carries no hint of denial or avoidance, but also no overwhelming sadness, because her understanding allows her to hold both the reality of loss and the belief in continuation at the same time, without feeling the need to resolve the tension between them. For Harry, this balance is much harder to achieve, because his experiences have not provided the same sense of peace, have not offered the same framework for understanding, and so he remains caught between what he feels and what he hopes, between the desire to believe that those he has lost still exist in some form and the fear that they are truly gone. The veil, in this context, becomes a focal point for these emotions, a place where his questions become more intense, where his longing becomes more immediate, and where his fear of loss becomes something he can no longer push aside, because it is tied directly to what he has witnessed, to what he has experienced, and to what he cannot fully understand. Luna's presence beside him does not remove these feelings, does not provide answers that resolve his uncertainty, but it does offer something else, something quieter but no less important, a different way of seeing, a reminder that the absence of clear answers does not necessarily mean the absence of meaning, that the inability to fully understand does not mean that nothing exists beyond what can be known. Her belief in an afterlife, in continued existence, is not presented as a solution to the mystery of the veil, but as a perspective that allows her to exist within that mystery without being overwhelmed by it, to accept that some things cannot be proven or explained, and yet still hold value, still carry truth in ways that do not require evidence. This perspective does not eliminate the mystery of the whispers, does not clarify what they are or where they come from, but it changes how they are experienced, shifting them from something unsettling and uncertain into something that can be acknowledged without fear, something that can be part of the world without needing to be fully understood. For Harry, this shift is not immediate, not complete, but it begins to take shape in small ways, in moments where he listens without demanding answers, where he considers the possibility that the veil is not just a barrier, but a connection, even if that connection cannot be fully accessed or explained. And in this space, between Luna's calm acceptance and Harry's unresolved longing, the veil continues to exist, unchanged, its whispers steady and indistinct, offering no confirmation, no denial, only the quiet suggestion that what lies beyond is not empty, not silent, but something that exists just beyond the reach of those who remain on this side. The contrast between them does not resolve the mystery, does not provide a single answer that can be accepted without question, but it does reveal something deeper about the nature of that mystery, that it is not only about what the veil is, but about how it is perceived, how it is understood, and how each individual brings their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own fears and hopes to the moment of standing before it. And perhaps this is what makes Luna's perspective so significant, not because it explains the veil, but because it changes the way it is experienced, offering a sense of calm where there might otherwise be fear, a sense of continuity where there might otherwise be finality, and a quiet acceptance of the unknown that allows the mystery to remain, not as something to be solved, but as something to be lived with. Magic versus mortality. In a world where magic can mend broken bones in moments, where distance can be folded into a single step, and where even time itself can be bent, paused, or revisited in careful and dangerous ways, it would seem almost natural to assume that death, too, would fall within the reach of control, that it might be delayed, altered, or even avoided entirely. And yet, as one looks more closely at the patterns within the wizarding world, a different truth begins to take shape, one that reveals not mastery over mortality, but a deep and persistent struggle with it, a divide that runs through every spell, every choice, and every attempt to understand what it means to live and to lose. This divide is not defined by knowledge alone, nor by power, because both are abundant within the magical world, but by perspective, by the way individuals choose to face or resist the idea that life has an end. And it is within this contrast that two figures stand apart, not simply as opposites in a traditional sense, but as representations of fundamentally different approaches to the same unavoidable truth. On one side stands Lord Voldemort, a figure whose entire existence becomes shaped by his refusal to accept death as a natural part of life, whose fear of it grows not quietly, but with intensity, driving him toward choices that push the boundaries of magic into places that are not only dangerous, but deeply unnatural, and whose understanding of mortality is defined not by acceptance, but by resistance at any cost. From an early point in his life, Voldemort's relationship with death is not one of curiosity or contemplation, but of rejection, a refusal to allow it any place within his future, a determination to stand outside of it entirely. And this determination leads him down a path that transforms him, not only in the physical sense, but in the way his very identity becomes fragmented, divided, and ultimately unstable. The creation of Horcruxes is perhaps the clearest expression of this fear, a process that does not preserve the self in its entirety, but breaks it apart, splitting the soul into pieces that are hidden and protected, ensuring that even if the body is destroyed, something remains behind, anchored to the world in a way that prevents complete death from taking hold. This is not a solution that brings peace or stability, but one that creates a constant state of tension, because the soul, once divided, cannot exist in the same way it once did, and the result is not true immortality, but a kind of prolonged existence that lacks wholeness, that lacks the natural balance between life and its ending. And in this imbalance, something essential is lost. Voldemort's fear of death does not diminish over time, does not soften with experience, but instead grows stronger, more urgent, more consuming. And it is this fear that drives him to seek control over everything around him, to eliminate threats, to dominate others, to reshape the world in a way that reflects his own need to escape the one thing he cannot fully conquer. And yet, despite all of this power, all of this knowledge, all of these efforts to resist mortality, the truth remains unchanged, because death cannot be removed entirely. It can only be delayed, distorted, or hidden behind layers of magic that do not resolve its presence, but only postpone the moment when it must be faced. On the other side stands Albus Dumbledore, a figure whose understanding of death moves in the opposite direction, not toward resistance, but toward acceptance, and whose perspective is shaped not by fear, but by a recognition that mortality is not an error to be corrected, but a part of existence that carries its own meaning. Dumbledore does not deny the pain of loss, does not suggest that death is something easy or without consequence, but he approaches it with a sense of calm that comes from understanding its place within the larger pattern of life. And this understanding allows him to make choices that reflect a balance between action and acceptance, between the desire to protect life and the recognition that it cannot be preserved indefinitely. He speaks of death not as an enemy, but as a transition, something that marks the end of one form of existence and the beginning of another, even if that next stage cannot be fully understood or observed. And this perspective removes the need for desperate measures, for the kind of extreme actions that define Voldemort's approach. Where Voldemort seeks to avoid death at all costs, Dumbledore accepts that it cannot be avoided forever. Where Voldemort fractures his soul to escape it, Dumbledore preserves his integrity, allowing himself to remain whole even as he moves closer to the end of his life. And in this contrast, the divide between magic and mortality becomes clear, not as a limitation of power, but as a reflection of choice, of how individuals respond to the knowledge that their time is finite. Magic, for all its possibilities, does not remove this choice. It does not eliminate death, does not erase its presence from the world, but instead offers different ways of approaching it. different paths that can be taken, each with its own consequences, each revealing something about the one who chooses it. It is within this context that the veil begins to take on a deeper meaning, not simply as an object of mystery, not simply as a strange feature within the Department of Mysteries, but as a symbol of this divide, a physical representation of the boundary that separates life from whatever lies beyond, and of the different ways that boundary can be understood. The veil does not respond to spells, does not shift under pressure, does not reveal its nature through study or experimentation in any clear or consistent way, and this resistance places it outside the usual framework of magical control, marking it as something that exists beyond the reach of even the most advanced forms of magic. For someone like Voldemort, this would represent a challenge, a problem to be solved, a barrier to be overcome, and yet there is no indication that the veil can be manipulated in the way other magical objects can. No sign that it can be used to extend life or to retrieve what has been lost. And this lack of control makes it fundamentally different from the tools he relies on. For someone like Dumbledore, however, the veil represents something else, not a problem to be solved, but a truth to be acknowledged, a reminder that there are limits to what magic can achieve, and that these limits are not necessarily weaknesses, but boundaries that give meaning to life itself. The veil stands quietly within its stone archway, its curtain moving gently as though stirred by something beyond the visible world, and it does not invite manipulation, does not offer power, but instead presents a choice, not in the sense that one can decide what it does, but in how one chooses to understand it. To see it as a doorway to be controlled is to approach it with the mindset of resistance, of attempting to impose will upon something that does not respond to it. To see it as a boundary to be respected is to approach it with acceptance, with the understanding that some aspects of existence cannot be altered, only acknowledged. Harry, standing between these perspectives, finds himself pulled in both directions, shaped by a world that offers examples of both resistance and acceptance, influenced by the fear that comes from loss and the hope that comes from understanding. And in this position, the veil becomes not just a symbol, but a question. What does it mean to face mortality? Is it something to fight against, to delay, to escape through whatever means are available, even at great cost? Or is it something to accept, to recognize as part of a larger pattern that cannot be changed, but can be understood? The wizarding world does not provide a single answer to this question, because it is not one that can be resolved through knowledge alone, but must be faced individually, shaped by experience, by belief, by the choices each person makes when confronted with the reality of death. The veil, in its quiet and unchanging presence, reflects this divide without resolving it, standing as a reminder that magic, for all its power, does not remove the need to choose how one responds to mortality, and that within that choice lies something deeper than any spell or incantation. It is not the absence of death that defines life, but the way it is understood, and in that understanding, the true nature of the divide between magic and mortality begins to take shape, not as a battle to be won, but as a question to be lived. Theories within the wizarding world. Deep beneath the ordered halls of the Ministry of Magic, where knowledge is catalogued, classified, and controlled with quiet precision, the Department of Mysteries exists as something of a contradiction, a place where the most important questions are not answered, but preserved, where uncertainty is not a flaw to be corrected, but a condition to be studied. And within this strange and careful balance, the veil stands as one of the most persistent and unsettling mysteries, a presence that invites investigation and resists it at the same time. It would be easy to assume that the veil, like the other phenomena housed within these hidden chambers, is the subject of ongoing research, that the unspeakables, who move silently through these corridors, have devoted years, perhaps even generations, to understanding its nature, its origin, and its purpose. And yet when one considers the way the veil behaves, the way it resists clear observation, and offers no consistent response to interaction, a different possibility begins to emerge, one that suggests that study, if it occurs at all, may not follow the same patterns as other forms of magical research. Unlike the time room, where hourglasses can be observed, measured, and even manipulated, or the Hall of Prophecy, where orbs can be catalogued and stored with identifiable connections to specific individuals, the veil does not provide stable data, does not reveal patterns that can be easily recorded, and does not respond in ways that allow for controlled experimentation. And this lack of consistency presents a fundamental challenge to anyone attempting to study it. What does it mean to study something that cannot be tested? How does one measure a phenomenon that changes not through physical interaction, but through perception, through the experiences of those who stand before it? These questions suggest that any research conducted within the Department of Mysteries must take a different form, one that relies less on direct manipulation and more on observation, on recording the experiences of those who encounter the veil, on noting who hears the whispers and who does not, who feels its pull and who remains unaffected. And even then, the results would remain incomplete, shaped by variables that cannot be controlled or predicted. It is possible that the unspeakables have attempted to approach the veil in this way, gathering accounts, comparing experiences, searching for patterns that might reveal some underlying structure, and over time, certain observations may have emerged, such as the connection between hearing the whispers and having witnessed death, or the consistent absence of return for those who pass through. But even these observations do not lead to clear conclusions, because they describe effects without explaining causes. And so the veil remains, not fully understood, not fully explained, existing within a space where knowledge is always just out of reach, where each discovery leads not to clarity, but to deeper questions. And this may be why the Department of Mysteries does not treat it in the same way as other magical phenomena, because there is a limit to what can be achieved through study alone. There is also the question of whether the veil is feared, not in the dramatic sense of something that inspires panic or avoidance, but in a quieter, more controlled way, a recognition among those who work within the department that this is not an object to be handled lightly, not something that can be approached without caution, because its effects are not reversible, its consequences not fully understood. The amphitheater structure surrounding the veil suggests that it was once observed more openly, that there may have been a time when its presence was not hidden away, but central, something that people gathered around, perhaps to witness, perhaps to participate in something that has long since been forgotten. And if this is true, then the current isolation of the veil may reflect a shift in understanding, a decision made at some point in history to move away from interaction and toward containment. Containment, in this context, does not mean control, because the veil cannot be controlled in any meaningful way, but rather limitation, a careful restriction of access, ensuring that only those who must encounter it do so, reducing the risk of accidental passage, of individuals stepping too close, drawn by whispers they do not fully understand. This approach suggests a level of caution that borders on respect, an acknowledgement that the veil represents something beyond the usual reach of magic, something that does not respond to authority or expertise, and therefore must be approached with a different mindset, one that accepts uncertainty rather than attempting to eliminate it. And yet, there is another possibility, one that exists alongside both study and caution, the idea that the veil may, in some ways, be left alone, not entirely ignored, but not actively pursued either, existing within the department as a known unknown, something that is recognized, documented, but not continuously examined in the way other mysteries might be. This would not be a failure of curiosity, but a recognition of limits, an understanding that some phenomena do not yield to investigation, that they remain unchanged regardless of how closely they are observed, and that continued effort to force understanding may not only be ineffective, but potentially dangerous. If the veil represents a boundary between life and whatever lies beyond, then attempting to study it too directly may risk crossing that boundary. And if no one has ever returned from such a crossing, then the cost of such research would be far too great to justify. This raises an even deeper question, one that touches on the nature of knowledge itself within the wizarding world. Because the Department of Mysteries exists to explore the unknown, to push the limits of what can be understood, and yet even within this environment, there appears to be an acceptance that some limits cannot be crossed, that some questions may remain unanswered, not because they are unimportant, but because they are unanswerable within the constraints of life. The unspeakables, by their very nature, are individuals who work at the edges of understanding, who dedicate themselves to the study of things that others might avoid or ignore, and yet even they may not fully understand the veil, not because they lack the skill or the knowledge, but because the veil does not operate within a framework that allows for complete comprehension. It is possible that they know more than anyone else, that they have gathered insights that remain hidden from the wider wizarding world, that they have developed theories, models, ways of interpreting the veil's behavior. But even these would likely remain partial, incomplete, shaped by observation rather than confirmation, because the veil does not provide clear answers, does not reveal its nature in a way that can be fully captured. This idea that even the most knowledgeable individuals within the magical world may not fully understand the veil adds another layer to its mystery, because it suggests that there are limits not only to what can be done, but to what can be known, that there are aspects of existence that remain beyond the reach of even the most advanced forms of magical study. And perhaps this is what the Department of Mysteries ultimately represents. Not a place where all questions are answered, but a place where the boundaries of knowledge are explored, where the unknown is acknowledged rather than eliminated, where mysteries are preserved even as they are examined. The veil stands at the center of this idea, not as a problem waiting to be solved, but as a reminder that some aspects of reality do not conform to expectation, do not yield to effort, do not become clearer with time, but remain as they are, constant and unresolved. Whether it is studied, feared, or left alone may not be a single answer, but a combination of all three, shifting over time, shaped by the experiences of those who encounter it, influenced by the understanding that grows around it without ever fully explaining it. And in that quiet chamber, beneath the weight of stone and secrecy, the veil continues to move, its whispers steady, its presence unchanged, existing within the Department of Mysteries, not as a subject that has been mastered, but as one that continues to resist, to remain just beyond the reach of even those who have dedicated their lives to understanding what cannot be easily known. Is it a gateway? The question does not arrive all at once, but grows slowly, shaped by everything that has been seen and everything that has not been explained, because standing before the veil, watching its soft and endless movement, hearing the faint and distant whispers that seem to drift from somewhere just beyond understanding, it becomes difficult to ignore the possibility that this is not simply an object, not simply a boundary, but something more, something that might lead somewhere. And this idea, once it begins to take form, refuses to settle into certainty, instead unfolding into a series of deeper and more unsettling questions. If the veil is a gateway, then it suggests that there is a destination, a place, or a state that exists beyond it, something that those who pass through enter, and this possibility carries with it both comfort and unease, because it implies continuation, the idea that death is not an end, but a transition. And yet it also raises the question of what that continuation truly means, what form it takes, and whether it is something that can ever be understood by those who remain on this side. Within the wizarding world, the concept of gateways is not unfamiliar, because magic itself often involves the crossing of thresholds, the movement from one place to another through means that defy ordinary limitations, whether it is through apparition, portkeys, or enchanted objects that connect distant locations. And yet, all of these forms of travel share one important characteristic. They are reversible, they allow for return. They create a connection that can be crossed in both directions. The veil does not offer this. There is no evidence that it allows for return, no indication that those who pass through it can step back, no sign that it functions as a passage in the same way as other magical gateways. And this absence creates a tension within the idea of it being a portal, because a portal that cannot be reversed begins to feel less like a pathway and more like a point of no return. And yet, the whispers remain. They suggest presence. They suggest that something exists beyond the veil, something that can be sensed even if it cannot be clearly understood. And this presence becomes the foundation for the idea that the veil does not simply end existence, but leads into something else, something that continues in a form that is not accessible to the living. This idea is not unique to the wizarding world, because across many cultures and throughout long stretches of human history, there have been stories, beliefs, and symbols that describe death not as a disappearance, but as a journey, a crossing, a movement from one realm into another, often marked by a threshold, a doorway, or a passage that separates the living from the dead. In ancient Greek mythology, for example, the river Styx stands as a boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, a dark and silent river that must be crossed with the help of a ferryman, a journey that marks the transition from one state of existence to another. And once crossed, it is not a journey that can easily be reversed, because the destination is not meant to be revisited. In Egyptian belief, the passage into the afterlife involves a series of trials and judgments, a movement through gates and chambers that test the soul, leading toward a final resting place or a continued existence in another form. And again, the idea is not of ending, but of transformation, of continuation beyond the physical life that has come to an end. Even in more modern interpretations, the idea of a gateway remains, often represented by light, by tunnels, by doors that open into something unknown. And these images persist because they provide a way of understanding death that does not rely on emptiness, but on movement, on the idea that there is something beyond the boundary, even if it cannot be clearly described. The veil, in its quiet and constant presence, seems to echo these ideas, not through direct confirmation, but through suggestion, through the way it behaves, through the way it draws attention, through the way it allows for the perception of something beyond without revealing what that something is. And this ambiguity places it firmly within the category of a possible gateway, a threshold that separates one state of existence from another. And yet, there is another possibility, one that cannot be ignored, because while the idea of a gateway offers a form of comfort, a sense of continuation, the veil does not explicitly confirm this, does not reveal a destination, does not provide any clear indication that what lies beyond is a place rather than an absence. The whispers, while suggestive, are not definitive. They do not form words, do not communicate intent, do not confirm the presence of specific individuals, and so they can be interpreted in multiple ways, not only as voices, but as echoes, as residual impressions, or even as projections shaped by the minds of those who hear them. If this is the case, then the veil may not be a gateway in the traditional sense, but something else entirely, something that marks the end of existence rather than the beginning of another phase, a point where consciousness ceases, where the self dissolves into something that cannot be perceived or understood. This interpretation is more difficult to accept, not because it is less plausible, but because it offers no continuation, no movement, no sense that what has been lost remains in any form. And this absence creates a different kind of tension, one that does not rely on mystery, but on finality. Within the wizarding world, where so many aspects of life can be extended, altered, or revisited, the idea that death might be absolute, that it might represent a true and complete ending, stands in contrast to the many examples that suggest otherwise. And this contrast makes the veil even more complex, because it exists at the intersection of these possibilities. neither confirming nor denying either interpretation. Harry, standing before the veil, experiences this tension directly, because for him, the question of what lies beyond is not abstract, not theoretical, but deeply personal, shaped by the loss of those he has cared about, by the absence that defines so much of his life, and by the possibility, however faint, that the veil might offer some form of connection, some indication that those he has lost are not entirely gone. The idea that it is a gateway provides hope, the sense that Sirius, that his parents, that others who have passed might still exist somewhere beyond the veil, that they have not disappeared, but have moved into a place that cannot be reached from this side. And this hope is difficult to let go of, because it offers a way of understanding loss that does not rely on complete separation, but the lack of confirmation, the silence of the veil, the absence of return, all work against this hope, creating a space where both possibilities exist at the same time, where the veil might lead somewhere or might lead nowhere, and where the truth cannot be fully known. This uncertainty is not resolved by knowledge or by observation, because the veil does not change, does not reveal more over time, does not respond to attempts to define it, and so it remains what it has always been, a threshold without explanation, a presence without clarity, a question without a clear answer. If it is a gateway, then it is one that cannot be crossed and returned from. If it is an end, then it is one that does not reveal itself clearly. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that it is both, that it represents a transition that cannot be understood from the perspective of the living, that what lies beyond is neither simply continuation nor simple absence, but something that exists outside the categories that can be easily defined. The veil continues to move, softly and endlessly, its surface offering no reflection, no glimpse of what lies beyond. And in that quiet motion, it holds its mystery, not as something waiting to be solved, but as something that exists at the edge of understanding, where the question of whether it leads somewhere or nowhere remains open, unresolved, and deeply compelling. The nature of the soul, in a world where magic can alter the visible and the physical with surprising ease, where objects can be transformed and distances can be folded into moments, there remains something far less stable, far less easily understood, something that cannot be seen directly, and yet shapes everything that lives and feels and remembers. And that is the soul, a concept that exists quietly beneath the surface of every spell and every choice, rarely explained in full, but deeply present in the consequences that unfold when it is disturbed. Within the events surrounding Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix and beyond, the soul is not treated as an abstract idea or a distant belief, but as something real, something that can be affected, damaged, preserved, and even divided. And this treatment gives it a strange kind of weight, because while it is not visible in the usual sense, its presence is undeniable in the way characters change, in the way their actions leave marks that go far beyond the physical world. For most individuals within the wizarding world, the soul remains whole, intact, moving quietly within the body, shaping identity, memory, and feeling without drawing attention to itself. And it is only when something disrupts this balance that the true nature of the soul begins to emerge, not through clear definition, but through the consequences of what happens when it is altered. One of the clearest examples of this disruption comes through the creation of Horcruxes, a form of magic so extreme that it requires not only knowledge, but a willingness to break something fundamental within oneself. Because in order to create a Horcrux, the soul must be split, torn apart through an act of deliberate harm, leaving one fragment within the body and placing another within an external object, anchoring existence in a way that defies the natural process of death. Lord Voldemort embodies this process more than any other figure, not as a single act, but as a repeated decision, each fracture weakening the integrity of the soul, each division creating a version of survival that is no longer complete, no longer stable. And this fragmentation reveals something important about the soul itself. that it is not meant to be divided, that its wholeness carries a kind of balance that is disrupted when it is broken apart. The existence of Horcruxes suggests that the soul is something that can be manipulated, but only at great cost, because while it allows for a form of continuation beyond the destruction of the body, it does so by reducing the self, by creating a version of existence that lacks unity, that lacks the coherence that defines a complete being. And this incomplete survival stands in contrast to the idea of death as a natural process, as something that, while final, preserves the integrity of the soul rather than breaking it. This contrast becomes even more striking when placed alongside the presence of the veil, because where Horcruxes represent an attempt to avoid death by dividing the soul, the veil appears to represent the opposite, not division, but passage, not fragmentation, but movement, a transition that does not leave pieces behind, but carries something entirely beyond the reach of the living world. The question then begins to take shape, not just of what the veil is, but of what it does to the soul. Because if the soul can be broken, can be altered, can be preserved in unnatural ways, then what happens when it passes through the veil? What state does it enter? And does that passage restore something that has been lost? Or does it release the soul into a form that can no longer be understood from this side? The idea of restoration suggests that the veil might serve as a kind of completion, a process that returns the soul to its natural state, undoing the damage caused by life, by conflict, by the choices that leave marks upon it. And this interpretation aligns with the belief that death is not simply an end, but a form of healing, a return to wholeness that cannot be achieved while bound to the physical world. If this is true, then the veil would not merely be a boundary, but a point of transformation, a place where the soul is no longer shaped by the limitations of the body, no longer influenced by fear or pain or the need to survive, but allowed to exist in a form that is complete, unified, and free from the fragmentation that can occur within life. This idea finds a quiet echo in the way certain characters speak about death, particularly those who approach it with acceptance rather than fear, suggesting that there is something beyond the loss that defines the experience of those who remain, something that cannot be fully described, but is not empty or meaningless. And yet, there is another possibility, one that does not focus on restoration, but on release. The idea that the veil does not repair or transform the soul, but simply allows it to move beyond the constraints of existence, to leave behind the identity and structure that defined it within life, and to enter a state that cannot be measured or observed. In this interpretation, the soul does not continue in a recognizable form, does not retain the individuality that defined it, but becomes part of something larger, something that does not reflect the same sense of self that existed before. And this possibility introduces a different kind of uncertainty, one that challenges the idea of continued identity beyond death. If the soul is released rather than restored, then what remains of the individual? What becomes of memory, of personality, of the connections that defined a life? And these questions do not have clear answers within the wizarding world, because while the existence of souls is acknowledged, their final state is not fully described. The whispers of the veil complicate this further because they suggest presence but not clarity, hinting at something that remains without confirming its nature. And this ambiguity allows for multiple interpretations, that the whispers are voices of souls that still exist in some form, or echoes of what once was, or even something shaped by the perception of those who listen. For Harry, this question is not abstract, not something to be considered from a distance, but something that carries emotional weight, because his experiences with loss have left him searching for understanding, for some indication that those he has lost have not simply disappeared, that they continue in some form beyond what can be seen. The idea that the veil restores the soul offers a kind of comfort, suggesting that those who pass through it are not diminished, not lost, but made whole, that whatever damage or pain they carried in life is left behind, and that they exist in a state that is complete and unbroken. The idea that the veil releases the soul, however, presents a different kind of truth, one that is harder to accept, because it suggests that the self, as it was known, does not continue in the same way, that the identity that defined a person may not remain intact, and that what lies beyond may not reflect the same form of existence that life provides. Between these possibilities, the veil remains silent. It does not confirm restoration, does not confirm release, does not reveal what happens to the soul once it passes through. And this silence is perhaps the most significant aspect of its mystery, because it leaves space for interpretation, for belief, for the personal understanding that each individual brings to the question. The contrast between Horcruxes and the veil then becomes even more meaningful, because it highlights two very different approaches to the soul, one that seeks to preserve it through division and control, and one that allows it to pass beyond control entirely. And in this contrast, the nature of the soul itself becomes clearer, not as something that can be fully defined, but as something that resists manipulation, that carries its own integrity, its own natural course. Whether the veil restores or releases the soul may not be a question that can be answered from the perspective of the living, because to know with certainty would require crossing that boundary, and no one who has done so has returned to explain what lies beyond. And so the veil remains, its curtain shifting softly, its presence steady and unresolved, standing as a quiet reminder that the nature of the soul, like the nature of death itself, exists at the edge of understanding, where questions can be asked but not fully answered, and where the truth, whatever it may be, remains just beyond reach. The veil, as symbol, there is a reason why the veil does not present itself as something solid or clearly defined, because unlike stone or metal or even glass, it does not create a firm boundary that can be easily understood or measured, and instead it takes the form of something thin, something shifting, something that moves gently even in still air. And in this choice of form, whether intentional or simply inherent to its nature, it begins to take on a meaning that goes beyond its function, becoming not just an object within a hidden chamber, but a symbol of something far more universal, something that exists in every world where life and death stand separated by a line that can be approached but never fully explained. The veil does not behave like a wall, because a wall is clear in its purpose. It blocks, it divides, it establishes a limit that cannot be crossed without force or effort, and its presence is unmistakable, leaving no doubt about where one side ends and the other begins. But the veil is different, because it does not block in the same way. It does not present itself as an obstacle, but rather as something that can be passed through, something that offers a sense of openness even as it conceals what lies beyond. And this difference is what allows it to function as a metaphor, as a representation of a boundary that is not solid, not fixed, but uncertain and shifting. When one stands before it, looking at the way the fabric moves without any visible cause, the way its edges appear worn and uneven, as though time has slowly pulled it apart, there is a sense that this is not a perfect or permanent barrier, but something fragile, something that might be crossed with a single step, and yet that step carries a consequence that cannot be reversed. And this tension between ease and finality reflects the nature of death itself, because death does not always arrive with warning or resistance. It does not always present itself as something that can be prepared for or understood in advance, but often appears suddenly, quietly, with a simplicity that contrasts sharply with its impact. The torn and fragile appearance of the veil adds another layer to this symbolism, because it suggests that the boundary between life and death is not entirely clean or clearly defined, that it is not a perfect separation, but something that has been shaped by time, by countless passages, by the accumulation of moments that have worn it down in ways that cannot be easily measured. And this imperfection creates a sense of uncertainty, a feeling that the line between existence and what lies beyond is not as firm as it might seem. This uncertainty is reflected in the way the veil behaves, because it does not reveal what lies behind it, does not provide a clear image, or a consistent sign that can be interpreted with confidence, and instead offers only suggestion, only the faint movement of fabric, the soft whispering that some can hear and others cannot, leaving those who stand before it to rely on perception rather than proof. In this way, the veil becomes more than just a boundary. It becomes a question, a representation of the unknown that surrounds death, because while it marks a transition, it does not define what that transition leads to. And this lack of definition is what makes it so powerful as a symbol, because it reflects the way death is experienced in reality, as something that is always present, always possible, but never fully understood until it is encountered directly. For Harry Potter, this symbolism becomes deeply personal, because the veil is not just an abstract representation, but something that has taken from him, something that has transformed his understanding of loss in a way that cannot be ignored. And when he looks at it, he does not see only a mysterious object, but a boundary that has already affected his life, a threshold that has already claimed someone he cared for. This connection intensifies the sense of uncertainty because the veil does not provide closure, does not offer a clear indication of what has happened to those who pass through it. And this absence of clarity mirrors the way loss often feels, not as a complete and understandable event, but as something that leaves behind unanswered questions, something that resists resolution, something that lingers in the mind long after the moment itself has passed. The idea that death is always close, yet never fully understood, is perhaps the most central aspect of the veil's symbolism, because it captures the tension between familiarity and mystery, the way death is a constant presence in life, something that everyone knows will come, and yet something that remains distant and abstract until it is experienced directly, and even then, it does not become fully clear. The veil stands as a reminder of this closeness, because it is not hidden away in a place that is entirely separate from the world, but exists within it, accessible, visible, able to be approached, and yet at the same time, it remains beyond understanding, beyond explanation, beyond the reach of those who stand on this side. This dual nature, this combination of proximity and distance, is what gives the veil its quiet power, because it reflects the way death exists in everyday life, not as something that can be ignored entirely, but not as something that can be fully grasped either, always present in the background, always shaping decisions and experiences in subtle ways, even when it is not directly acknowledged. The amphitheater structure surrounding the veil adds to this symbolism because it suggests observation, the idea that death is something that can be witnessed, something that others can see from a distance, even if they cannot fully understand what it means for the one who experiences it. And this separation between observer and participant reflects the way people relate to death in their own lives, able to see it happen to others, to recognize its presence, but unable to fully comprehend it until it touches them directly. The veil, standing at the center of this space, becomes the focal point of this observation, the place where the boundary is most visible, where the question is most immediate, and yet, even here, even at the point where life and death seem closest, the answer remains hidden, the meaning remains uncertain. For some, like Luna Lovegood, this uncertainty does not create fear, but acceptance, a willingness to exist within the unknown without needing to resolve it. And this perspective highlights another aspect of the veil's symbolism, that the boundary between life and death is not only a physical or metaphysical divide, but an emotional and psychological one, shaped by how individuals choose to understand it. For others, like Harry, the veil represents something more difficult, a source of longing, of unanswered questions, of a desire to know what lies beyond. And this contrast between acceptance and uncertainty reflects the different ways people respond to the idea of death, the different ways they interpret the boundary it represents. The veil does not resolve these differences, does not provide a single interpretation that can be accepted by all, but instead holds them within its presence, allowing for multiple perspectives to exist at the same time, each shaped by experience, by belief, by the personal connection each individual has to the idea of loss. And perhaps this is what makes the veil such a powerful symbol. Not that it explains death, but that it reflects the complexity of how death is understood, the way it can be seen as an ending or a transition, as something to be feared or accepted, as something distant or something always close. The torn edges of the fabric, the constant movement, the whispers that never fully form into words, all contribute to this sense of uncertainty. This idea that the boundary between life and death is not a clear line, but something that shifts, something that cannot be fully defined, something that remains just beyond understanding, no matter how closely it is examined. And in this way, the veil continues to exist, not just as an object within a hidden chamber, but as a representation of a question that has no final answer, a boundary that can be approached but not fully crossed, a symbol of the space between what is known and what remains forever just out of reach. Why the mystery remains? There is a certain kind of silence that does not come from the absence of words, but from the deliberate choice not to fill a space with explanation, and it is within this kind of silence that the mystery of the veil continues to exist, not because it has been overlooked or forgotten, but because it has been left as it is, unresolved, undefined, and quietly present in the background of a story that offers answers to so many other questions, while holding this one just beyond reach. Within the world created by J.K. Rowling, there are many elements that are explained in detail, systems of magic that are carefully structured, histories that are revealed piece by piece, and connections that are drawn between characters and events in ways that allow the reader to understand not only what is happening, but why it is happening. And yet the veil does not follow this pattern, because it is introduced, experienced, and left without a final explanation, its nature suggested but never fully defined. This absence of explanation is not an accident, not a gap in the narrative that was meant to be filled but never was, but rather a deliberate choice, one that shapes the way the veil is perceived, not as a puzzle waiting to be solved, but as a question that exists without a clear answer, a presence that resists the kind of closure that other parts of the story provide. It would be possible, in theory, to offer a detailed explanation of the veil, to define it as a portal to a specific place, to describe what lies beyond it in clear and consistent terms, to establish rules for how it works and what it represents, and in doing so, to remove the uncertainty that surrounds it, to transform it from a mystery into a known element within the world. But something would be lost in that process, because the power of the veil does not come from what it reveals, but from what it withholds, from the way it creates a space where interpretation is possible, where different perspectives can exist without being reduced to a single, definitive answer. And this openness allows it to carry a meaning that extends beyond the boundaries of the story itself. In many ways, the veil reflects the way real-world questions about death and what lies beyond are experienced, because despite centuries of belief, philosophy, and speculation, there is no single explanation that resolves the uncertainty, no answer that can be confirmed from the perspective of those who remain alive. And this lack of certainty does not diminish the importance of the question, but instead deepens it, making it something that is continuously explored, continuously considered, without ever reaching a final conclusion. By leaving the veil unexplained, the narrative allows it to mirror this reality, to become not just a fictional object, but a representation of a question that exists outside of the story, something that resonates because it reflects a universal experience, the encounter with something that cannot be fully understood, something that can be approached but not completely known. For Harry Potter, this lack of explanation becomes part of his journey, because the veil is not just something he encounters, but something that affects him directly, shaping his understanding of loss, of absence, of the possibility that what lies beyond might still hold some connection to those he has lost. And yet, without a clear answer, he is left to navigate these questions on his own, to find meaning not through certainty, but through experience. This process reflects a larger theme within the story, the idea that not all questions are meant to be answered in a direct or complete way, that some aspects of life are defined by uncertainty, by the need to accept that understanding has limits, and that these limits do not necessarily weaken the experience, but can deepen it, adding layers of meaning that would not exist if everything were clearly defined. The veil, in this context, becomes a focal point for this theme, a place where the narrative chooses not to provide closure, not to resolve the mystery, but to allow it to remain, to continue existing as a question that shapes the way the story is understood without being fully contained within it. This choice also invites the audience to engage with the mystery in a more active way, to consider their own interpretations, to reflect on what the veil might represent, whether it is a gateway, a boundary, an ending, or something else entirely. And this engagement transforms the experience from passive observation into something more personal, something that continues beyond the final page. If the veil were fully explained, this process would be limited, because there would be less room for interpretation, less space for individual understanding, and the mystery would become something that belongs only to the story, rather than something that extends into the thoughts and reflections of those who encounter it. There is also a narrative balance at play, because while the story provides clarity in many areas, offering explanations for how magic works, how characters are connected, how conflicts are resolved, it also preserves certain elements as unresolved, creating a contrast that makes the world feel more complex, more layered, more reflective of reality, where not everything is known, not everything is explained. The Department of Mysteries itself embodies this idea, a place where questions are studied without the expectation that they will all be answered, where the unknown is not eliminated but explored, and the veil stands as one of the clearest examples of this approach. Not because it is the only mystery, but because it is one that directly touches on something fundamental, something that cannot be easily reduced to a set of rules or explanations. Even the characters within the story do not fully understand the veil, and this lack of understanding is not presented as a failure, but as a condition of the world they inhabit, a reminder that knowledge has limits, that there are aspects of existence that remain beyond the reach of even the most skilled and experienced individuals. This idea reinforces the sense that the veil is not meant to be solved, not meant to be fully understood, but meant to exist as it is, as a point of uncertainty that shapes the way the world is perceived, both within the story and beyond it. The mystery itself becomes part of its power, because it creates a sense of depth, a feeling that there is more to the world than what is immediately visible or explained, and this depth allows the story to resonate on multiple levels, offering not only a narrative, but a space for reflection, for questions that do not have simple answers. In the end, the veil remains what it has always been, a shifting curtain within an ancient archway, a presence that invites curiosity and resists definition, a mystery that continues not because it has been forgotten, but because it has been preserved, allowed to exist without resolution. And in that preservation, it becomes something more than just a part of the story. It becomes a reminder that some questions do not lose their value because they remain unanswered, but gain it, becoming more meaningful precisely because they cannot be fully explained. The quiet beyond there is a kind of stillness that arrives long after the moment of loss has passed. A quiet that does not erase what happened, but changes how it is carried. And within that stillness, something begins to settle, not as a clear answer, but as a shift in how the absence is understood. Less sharp in its urgency, yet deeper in its presence, shaping thought in ways that are no longer driven by immediate disbelief, but by a slower, more reflective awareness. For Harry Potter, the loss of Sirius Black does not become simple or easy with time, because the way it happened resists easy understanding. The sudden fall through the veil, leaving behind no visible trace, no final moment that can be held onto or replayed with clarity. And this absence of a clear ending creates a space where the mind continues to search, even when there is nothing left to find. In the beginning, that search is restless, filled with the need to make sense of what cannot be explained, driven by the belief that something must still be there. that the lack of a body, the lack of a voice, the lack of any clear confirmation leaves room for something to be undone. And this feeling does not disappear quickly, because it is rooted in something deeply human, the refusal to accept that a connection can simply end without warning, without closure, without a final word. But time does not offer reversal, and the world does not reshape itself to answer that refusal. And slowly, through days that continue to move forward regardless of what has been lost, Harry begins to feel the weight of reality in a different way, not as something imposed from outside, but as something that grows from within, a quiet recognition that what has happened is not waiting to change, not waiting to be undone. This recognition does not arrive as a single moment of acceptance, but as a gradual adjustment, a series of small shifts in understanding, where the need to reach back begins to loosen, where the absence becomes something that can be held rather than fought against. And in this process, the memory of Sirius begins to take on a different form, no longer tied only to the moment of loss, but to everything that came before it, to the presence that shaped Harry's life in ways that remain even after he is gone. The veil, once the center of confusion and urgency, becomes something else over time, not less mysterious, but less demanding, no longer pulling with the same intensity, no longer calling for immediate answers, but remaining as a quiet presence in the background of thought, a place that marks a boundary rather than a puzzle to be solved. When Harry reflects on that moment now, he does not see only the instant of disappearance, but the space itself, the archway, the curtain moving in a way that defied the stillness of the room, the faint voices that seemed to exist just beyond understanding. And in this reflection, there is a sense that what he encountered was not something meant to be explained, but something meant to be faced. There is a difference between understanding and acceptance, and it is in this difference that Harry's perspective begins to settle, because while he does not gain clear knowledge of what lies beyond the veil, he begins to accept that such knowledge may not be something he is meant to have, and this realization, though quiet, carries a kind of strength, allowing him to move forward without needing to resolve every question that remains. Luna Lovegood once spoke about death with a sense of calm that felt distant at the time. Her belief that those who are gone are not truly lost, offering a perspective that did not depend on proof or evidence. And while Harry may not fully share that certainty, her words begin to hold a different kind of meaning, not as something that explains the veil, but as something that changes how it is approached. Instead of seeing it only as a place that took something from him, he begins to see it as a point where something passed beyond his reach, not destroyed, not erased, but moved into a space that does not allow for return. And this shift, though subtle, changes the nature of his grief, turning it from a struggle against what cannot be changed into something that can be carried alongside everything else that continues. The veil itself does not change. It does not reveal new answers or offer clarity with time, and this unchanging nature becomes part of its meaning because it exists outside of personal experience, outside of individual loss, continuing in the same way regardless of who stands before it. And this constancy gives it a kind of quiet permanence, a reminder that the boundary it represents is not shaped by emotion or desire, but by something deeper, something that does not shift to match what is wished for. And yet, there is something about it that lingers, something that remains present even when it is not seen directly, because once encountered, it becomes part of how the world is understood, part of the awareness that there are limits to what can be known, that there are edges to existence that cannot be crossed and returned from. The idea that it is still there, still existing in that hidden chamber, still moving in its soft and steady way, creates a sense that the mystery has not ended, that it continues quietly, waiting not in the sense of expecting something to happen, but simply in the sense of being there, unchanged, part of a world that does not require explanation in order to exist. For Harry, this awareness does not bring closure in the traditional sense, because the questions remain, the uncertainty remains, but it does bring a kind of balance, a way of holding both the loss and the unknown without needing to resolve them completely. And in that balance, there is a form of acceptance that does not erase the past, but allows it to exist without overwhelming the present. Sirius is not forgotten. He remains in memory, in thought, in the quiet moments where his presence can still be felt in ways that do not depend on the veil or what lies beyond it. And this continuation, though different from what Harry once hoped for, becomes its own form of connection, something that does not rely on crossing boundaries, but on carrying forward what was shared. The veil, in contrast, remains separate, a place that marks a limit rather than a continuation, and in this separation, it takes on a different role, not as something to be approached again, but as something to be understood from a distance, something that exists without needing to be entered. There is a kind of wisdom in recognizing where not to go, in understanding that not every path is meant to be followed, that not every threshold is meant to be crossed. And this understanding does not come from fear, but from awareness, from the recognition that some boundaries exist for a reason, even if that reason is not fully understood. The voices that can be heard by some do not become clearer with time, do not resolve into meaning, and perhaps that is part of their nature, not to explain, but to remind, to exist as a presence that suggests something beyond without defining it, leaving space for interpretation without providing certainty. And in that space, the veil continues to hold its place, not as a problem waiting to be solved, but as a reality that exists alongside everything else, a quiet and constant reminder that there are aspects of existence that remain beyond reach, not because they are hidden, but because they are not meant to be brought back. Harry moves forward, carrying what he has lost, shaped by what he has experienced, and while the memory of the veil remains, it no longer pulls in the same way, no longer demands to be answered, but simply exists as part of a larger understanding, one that accepts that some things cannot be fully known, and in that understanding, there is a kind of peace, not complete or absolute, but enough to continue, enough to let the questions remain without needing to resolve them, enough to accept that some doors stand not as invitations, but as boundaries, and that respecting them is not a loss, but a recognition of where life ends and something else, something unknown, quietly begins. And now, as we step away from the quiet chamber and leave the whispering veil behind, the world of questions and unseen boundaries begins to soften, its edges fading into a calm and gentle stillness, where the need to understand slowly gives way to the simple act of letting things be. The archway remains where it has always stood, its curtain moving softly in the darkness, not asking to be solved, not demanding to be known, but simply existing, as it always has, at the edge of what we can see and what we can only imagine. Perhaps the truth of it was never meant to be uncovered, but only felt, in the quiet spaces between thought and memory, where loss and wonder rest side by side, no longer in conflict, but in quiet balance. And as your mind begins to drift, you may let the mystery remain where it belongs, untouched, unspoken, and gently distant, like a soft echo fading into the night. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to uncover, only the calm awareness that some questions do not need answers to hold meaning. And in that stillness, you may now rest,